It was the winter of 1976, and the suburban streets of Oakland County, Michigan, were buzzing with the usual hum of everyday life, until a chilling string of disappearances shattered the peace. 4 children, all abducted in broad daylight, vanished without a trace. Their families clung to the hope that they would return home. But the horror that unfolded in the following months would haunt this community forever. Known as the Babysitter Killer, the killer's gruesome acts left parents terrified and investigators stumped. This is the twisted story of the Oakland County child murders. The nightmare began on February 15, 1976, when 12-year-old Janine Nicarico disappeared while walking home from a friend's house. Her body was found days later, dumped by the side of the road. Horrifically, her life was stolen, and yet there were no signs of a struggle. She had simply vanished. Only a few months later, on the night of March 16, 1976, the sense of dread became even more real. 10-year-old Timothy King was out on his bike near his home in Birmingham, Michigan. It was just a short ride, yet he never made it back. His body was discovered 4 days later in a wooded area, and the unmistakable pattern was forming. The murderer had abducted him, keeping him for several days before his body was discarded like the others. Timothy's parents were beside themselves. Where was their boy? How could this happen? As summer drew closer, the terror only deepened. 2 more children were abducted. 12-year-old Christine Mihalich and 11-year-old Mark Stebbins. Like the others, their bodies were found days later, their lives taken in cold, calculated brutality. Oakland County has become a literal killing field, a place where no children was safe, and no parent could be sure their children would return home. The community's sense of security had been ripped apart. The fear of predator lurking among them sent waves of panic to the quiet suburban neighborhoods. But the question remained, who was the killer? What did they want, and why were the children chosen? As the murders mounted, investigators worked tirelessly to find the connection between the victims, but there was none. No physical evidence, no motives, no patterns. The police conducted interviews, followed leads, and even worked with forensic experts, yet they were unable to crack the case. Each new victim brought new clues, but none that pointed to the killer. The police were grasping at straws. The fear among residents grew as the killer seemed to be watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Parents became increasingly paranoid, guarding their children more fiercely, but the fear lingered. The silence of the killer's identity hung over the community like a dark cloud. There were theories. Some believed the killer lived in the area, familiar with the suburban streets, able to blend in effortlessly. Others speculated that the abductions had ritualistic elements, that the murderer was using children for dark, unspeakable purposes. The more investigators uncovered, the more unsettling the case became, but still there was no solid lead. At one point, a potential suspect emerged, a man named Christopher Bush, whose connection to the case seemed too suspicious to ignore. He had been convicted of molesting a child years earlier, and his background matched some of the psychological profiles of the killer. Yet, despite multiple leads pointing to Bush, the evidence was circumstantial. Authorities were frustrated, but hope was dwindling and the case grew cold. Years passed, but the terror never fully left Oakland County. The murders were unsolved and no one was ever caught. One time, the case began to fade from the media, but the memories of those innocent children and the questions about their killer lingered in the minds of those who lived through it. In 1978, investigators caught a break when Bush took his own life, but questions about his involvement remained unanswered. There were theories that his death meant the case was closed, but there was still no defined proof that Bush had been the killer. Some even believed that the murders were the work of more than one person, possibly a network of people preying on vulnerable children. Today, the Oakland County child murder case remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in American history. Was it Christopher Bush, or was the real killer still out there, hiding in plain sight? Despite decades of investigation, the true identity of the Babysitter Killer remains a haunting unknown. And with that haunting question, the nightmare continues to live on in the hearts and minds of the families who lost their children, and in the community that was forever scarred by the fear of an unsolved monster in their midst. The Oakland County child murders are a dark chapter in true crime history that leaves us with more questions than answers. A killer who terrorized the city, a case that has never fully closed, and a community that still lives in the shadow of a tragedy they cannot explain. As the years pass, the hope for closure dwindles, but the mystery remains. Who was the Babysitter Killer, and why did they do it? The children who were taken from us will never be forgotten, but until justice is served, the fear and unanswered questions will continue to haunt Oakland County forever.